I'm going to get into it because we haven't got a lot of time and I've got a lot of content. So quick intro. So I'm not Rishi. I'm James. I've spent the last, I guess, 20 years of my life working in consulting, most recently for a large international Microsoft consultancy running the Power BI capability there. But as of this month, I've taken a brave step and left and set my own thing up. So I'll talk a little bit about the reasonings for that as we go through. I'm also the co-leader of a London Power BI user group, so sister event for this, based down in London. I've been leading with Prafi Kamasani for the last 6 years, but it's actually our 8th birthday this month, so we're looking forward to a bit of a party. Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and a couple of years ago, Microsoft let me loose on the Power BI code base, and I built some of the functionality, particularly around conditional formatting in the KPI visual, the table visual, and the matrix visual. So chances are you've probably used some of my code already. Sorry if it was buggy, but hopefully it was all right. And I'm also the author of a popular map custom visual for Power BI, which again we'll get to and I'll talk a bit about as we go through and explain how that's going to evolve in the future. So the plan of the session is for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk through the different options we've got for mapping in Power BI as it comes out of the box, walk through the different types of visualization that we can build using those core visuals, and then I'm going to use the second half of the session to talk about what happens when we want to do something a bit more advanced or a bit more complicated. So let's get into it. What are our options for maps in Power BI? Well, on the surface, it looks like we've got quite a lot of options. We've got 5 map visuals built into Power BI. We've got Field Map, we've got Shape Map, we've got Map, we've got ArcGIS Maps, and we've got Azure Maps. So the interesting thing is, though, that I don't know who was at SQL Bits last time it was in London 2 years ago. A few of you. I think it was the Microsoft keynote that they mentioned that these first 3 visuals are going to be retired out of Power BI. And in fact, if you set up a new Power BI tenant today, these 3 visuals are by default turned off, so they won't even appear in Power BI Desktop once you're signed in. So I'm not going to talk about those. And it leaves us with these 2. So the interesting thing about ArcGIS Maps is that it's not actually written by Microsoft. It's been created by a third-party specialist mapping company called Esri. And in all intents and purposes, it's a custom visual. It's just a custom visual that Microsoft have agreed to include as part of the core product. And I don't know if you've used it, but it doesn't really feel like one of the core Power BI visuals. You configure it in a different way. It behaves in a different way. It doesn't support most of the core Power BI functionality like highlighting and drill down, conditional formatting. None of those things exist. And in fact, most of the functionality is really geared to organizations that have an ArcGIS subscription or an ArcGIS server in their organizations. The functionality that you get for free is pretty limited. So I'm going to focus on the Azure Maps visual to start with. So Azure Maps is the visual that all of that functionality from those existing 3 visuals is being built into over the course of time. And actually, they've probably already replaced the Field Map. Shape Map's a little way off. If you're familiar with it, it's the visual that's been at the top of that preview list for the last 8 years, and as we know now, will never come out of preview. And what was the third one? Oh yeah, the original map visual. So that map visual is built on the old Bing Maps API, which Microsoft have already discontinued. So they're really keen to get that out of the ecosystem and move everything into the Azure environment. So that's my last slide. Let's jump out of PowerPoint and get into Power BI Desktop, and I'll walk you through building some maps. Now, of course, before we can build maps, we need some data. So I've imported some open data. Data set I'm going to use, some of you will be familiar with. I've got one core data set. Let me show you what it looks like. Is that big enough? Can you see that? So I've gone to data.police.uk and I've downloaded for the whole of England 1 month's worth of crime. So in my data set, each row in this crime table represents a single crime that has occurred somewhere in England in March 2023 in one of the 43 police forces that covers England. And for each of those crimes, I've got the longitude and latitude, so the coordinates where that crime occurred. And it's not like somebody's individual house that got burgled. It's a little bit more private than that. It's actually the center point of the street where that house got burgled. So it gives people a little bit of privacy. We've got this location field, which is just a text description that says something like on or near shopping centre or on or near car park, that kind of thing. Then we've got this LSOA code field, which is quite important to us. So this stands for lower super output area. Anybody familiar with these? Okay, so this LSOA code is a statistical construct. It's used predominantly by local government and statistical, central government, and it's like a statistical region. It represents like more than a few postcodes, but much smaller than a local authority area. So it's a region. I've got the crime type, what type of crime it is. We're not going to worry too much about that. I've got what the outcome of the investigation is. Not going to worry too much about that. I've got this column called crime count. Now, this is me cheating. I don't like writing DAX in front of an audience. So if I have a column full of ones, so each row represents one crime. So if I sum up that column, it will tell me how many crimes occurred in this place or of this type. Just means I don't have to do any DAX at all. I can just drag in the crime count column and it will do a sum for me. And then this last column I've created, and I'll explain why as we go through, but I've created a new text field that's just an aggregation, a merged field in Power Query of the longitude and latitude. And I've just joined them together. And what that does is it creates a unique identifier representing the location where the crime occurred. So at the moment, without that field, I haven't got any individual column that represents a location. So if I merge those two columns together, it's effectively giving me a cheap way of creating an ID. So if I've got multiple crimes that have occurred in the same street, they're going to have the same combined field or the same ID. And then my second table of data is a simple lookup table. So I've downloaded this from the Office for National Statistics GeoPortal. Again, it's open data. And it takes that lower super output area, so that small region, and then it takes me up the hierarchy. So it'll let me join to either a police force or a local authority or like Northern England or West Midlands as we go up the hierarchy. And that's it. They're just simply joined together with that LSOA code field. And that's all my data. And I think that will do us for the majority of the first 25 minutes. So let's start. So if you haven't seen me present before, I always like to start with a blank canvas and build things up from scratch. So let's add on Slicer. We'll use that a little bit later, but I'm going to drag in the region. And let's bring on the Azure Maps visual, which is this icon here. Let's make it big enough to see. And then we've got longitude and latitude in our data set. So let's start there. That's our location data. It seems like a reasonable place to start. So let's pull on latitude and longitude. And straight away we get a map. And what it looks like it's done is it's given us a point for all of those crimes that have occurred, right? Well, that's what you might assume has happened, but something a little bit more dangerous than that has happened. You might notice we've got this little eye symbol up here in the top right-hand corner. If I click on that, it gives us a little warning message, and it says, because we've thrown too much data into the visual, we're only going to show you a subset of that data. And in fact, it's prioritizing the data points that don't have other data points nearby. So if I'm trying to understand where the clusters of crimes are occurring in England, I don't really want Power BI to take all of those clusters of crimes near to each other away. So I'm not going to really be able to understand what's going on. And the reason this has happened is because almost all of the core visuals in Power BI have a maximum limit of 30,000 rows of data. So if I go back to my crime data, which is this table, if you have a look in the bottom left-hand corner, it's got 518,333 rows. That's how many crimes occurred in March last year. And if I try and visualize all of those in my map visual, I'm only going to get a really, really small subset of them shown on the map. So we need a strategy to deal with this, right? I want to understand the picture of crime without throwing most of my data away. Well, I guess the easiest thing to do is to filter the data, right? I've got my little region switch on here, and I can filter on West Midlands, and it will show me all of the crimes that have occurred around here, or I can filter on London, and it will show me all of the crimes that have occurred in London. In fact, that looks like it's filled most of Greater London. But I've still got this little icon here in the top right-hand corner. So clearly I've still got too much data. Let's find out how much is too much data. So let's drag on a card visual. And if I drag in, doesn't actually matter which field, if I do a count on there, we can see that we've got 85,000 rows of data. So I'm actually throwing away still more than 55,000 rows of data. So I'm still not getting a good picture, even though it looks like it. So other strategies, what can we do? Well, what happens if we have a look at the distinct count of that field? This is a bit more interesting. I've only got just over 30,000 unique locations where those crimes have occurred in London. So whilst I've got 85,000 rows of data, I've actually only got 30-odd thousand of them that have occurred in different places. So if we do things a bit differently, if I drag on that field I created with a unique location ID on, and I change my longitude and latitude from do not summarize to average, and let's have a look what that's done. So now I'm pulling on 30,000 unique locations, and it started at the right-hand side, and it's got most of the way across London. And then these are the remaining 660 locations just off here on the right-hand side that are still missing. But happy that I've got most of the data now on the map. And the interesting thing is, the algorithm that the map visual uses to display this data with this field configuration says start at the top and just give me the first 30,000 rows that you give me. But if I drag in the crime count into the size field, it actually then uses a different algorithm. It then samples the data, and it will do what it did in the very first place, where it gave me that best approximation of the data, removing some of those locations are overlaid on top of each other. But I'm a lot happier losing 660 rows to sampling than I am losing 55,000 rows to sampling. And the actual really interesting thing is, having done that, the one point that was missing was this huge, great big circle over here on the left for Heathrow Airport, where there's, you know, a good chunk of London crime recorded. But it's still a bit of a mess, isn't it? It's really hard to see what's going on. I've just got this mass of circles. I still can't really tell where the crime's going on. Even if I zoom in, it's still a mass of circles. So let's see if we can improve things a little bit. Well, first thing I'm going to do is alter my bubble there, and I'm going to make the minimum size a bit smaller. And that'll give me more variation in the sizes of circles, which will help, maybe not at this level, but if I zoom in, it gives us a bit more variation. I can see now there's a bit more crime going on here than there is these little small dots. But it's still quite hard to tell what's going on. So another technique that we can use is to, as well as filtering our data and making it range in size, is we can aggregate data. So whilst I've got my unique location ID here, I've also got my geography table sat here with my geographic hierarchy ready to go. So if I pull on a couple of layers of that hierarchy, so I pull on that lower super output area field and the location, and so the local authority field, I now get a circle for each local authority in London. I mean, it doesn't have to be London, right? This works for the whole UK. So I get a circle for every single local authority. And how it works out where to put that circle is it takes the average longitude and latitude for all of the crimes that have occurred for that local authority. So it basically puts a circle in the middle of all of the crime for each local authority. So it does a pretty good job of representing the crime. And then because I've created that hierarchy up here, I get the drill down options turned on my map. So I can click on drill down, and let's stick with London for now. I can drill into the circle and then get to that lower super output area field. So I can see here that I'm in Westminster, and funnily enough, most of the crime seems to happen in Parliament. So let's drill down a little bit further, and we can see that we've got a bunch of crime going up here on Charing Cross Road. I don't know what that is. Or there was another big circle, wasn't there, just next to it? Let's go back up here. City of Westminster, and I can see that we've got a chunk of crime on Oxford Street. So this gives us a way of getting right down into the detail and finding out where our high areas of crime are, even though we're starting with 500,000 rows of data. It's good for the detail, but I'd still like a better way of examining that picture where we've got this situation where we want to see the whole of London at a time. Well, Microsoft have given us a few more tools to play with. Now, we had a couple of months ago a new feature added to the Azure Maps visual, and this is the ability to cluster our points on the map. So if I turn on cluster bubbles, instead of showing 30,000 circles, we get a much smaller number of circles and a number that we can't read. Let's fix that. So I've worked out you can increase the circle size to 20 pixels and then they become readable, or you can change the font size. Why the default size isn't legible, I don't know. And what this does is it gives us a number saying how many points are behind this particular circle, and then I can either zoom in on the map and it'll expand those out, or I can click on them and it will zoom centered on that circle until we get down to the individual points of data again. Now, whilst it might look like it solves our row limit problem, need to be cautious. It's still only ever based on 30,000 rows, even though it's not displaying all of them at the same time. So need to be a bit careful about that. And I'm not a big fan of this because this circle here contains 3,500 points behind it. This one contains 2, and at a glance they look the same to me. So it helps in some situations, but I don't think it's great for analysing our whole picture of data. So let's try something else. But let's completely turn off our circles and let's try the 3D column layer. Now what this does is, instead of putting circles on the map, it's going to create 3D bars, which, and it also, it tilts the map for us as well, so we can do that. And then as we rotate the map around, we can kind of see where some of these peak areas are a little bit better than we could the circles. We've got this bar right here over Heathrow Airport, indicating that data that we lost before quite clearly. And we've got this peak back over here around Westminster. It's really hard to look at the screen and do that. Look at my laptop again. So it sort of helps, but actually with 30,000 rows of data, it's really slow and laggy. I'm struggling to drag this around, and I'm still not sure it looks great. But we've got one more trick up our sleeve. We've got the heat map. Now again, the default formatting options for the heat map aren't particularly useful, but with a little bit of tweaking, if I make the radius smaller and change the color scheme slightly, so let's go from blue to yellow to red, say, and if I start zooming in, we can kind of see that little bit area of intensity around Westminster. But then when I zoom all the way in, all of that detail is now lost. I can't really tell that we had that big cluster around Oxford Street. There's just lots of small circles. So I kind of want a compromise between that nice heat map at London level and then my bubbles showing where the detail is once I've zoomed in. The good news is we can do that. So on the heat map, if I go to the zoom options, I can say that I only want the heat map to appear until we zoom in to zoom level 12. So if I zoom in now, you'll see at some point it just vanishes. It's gone. So what I can do is turn the bubble layer back on, and similarly, I can say that I want that to only start at zoom level 12. 12 is just an arbitrary number I've picked. Zoom levels go between 0 at the whole world to round about 22 or 24, depending on the map provider, for really detailed building levels. So 12 is kind of in the middle. So now if I zoom in, we'll still aim at Westminster. Now I get to zoom level 12, and we switch back to circles to see where that detail is, and I can see my nice big circles over Oxford Street still. So this is kind of my compromise between the two. We can even go one step further. On the bubbles, we can even change the color scheme using conditional formatting. Let's base it on the crime count to use a similar color scheme to the heat map. And now not only have we got the bubble size, when that redraws, to zoom back in again, when it redraws, we also get some of those bubbles highlighted, so it takes our eye straight to those areas of high crime. The only thing I'm really missing now is, whilst I've got the detailed picture and a nice London picture, I don't really know that that's Westminster. I don't know that that's Surbiton, for example, I think, or, you know, which bit of London everything is. It would be quite nice if we had the local authority boundaries on here. So I can go down and add a reference layer and upload a file, not that one, spatial analytics, and the file formats that are supported here are GeoJSON, KML, and Esri shape files as of this month. I'm going to stick with a basic GeoJSON file. And if we wait a second, we get now, let me zoom in a bit, we can just about make out that we've got these local authority boundaries overlaid, underlaid, in fact, under our data layer to help us identify where those local authorities are. The only problem is it's a bit hard to see because it's blue, the same color as my bubbles. And you'll notice over here on the reference layer, there's no formatting options. I can't change the color. It's blue or blue. And it's still quite opaque. Now I've lost the map underneath. I can't change that. And it's a good job the data I'm trying to visualize isn't on the sea. Otherwise, we won't be able to see anything. So I think this will be more useful once we've got some formatting options in there to be able to format it. But it's a start. What I'd really like to be able to do is use conditional formatting on these and use that gradient to be able to color each of those local authority areas based on the amount of crime that has appeared in the local authorities. But we can't do that yet. If we want to do that kind of map, we still have to use the shape map, but shape map's being retired, it's in preview, and you don't get the map behind it. And you can't overlay anything else on top either. So we're a little bit stuck and can't actually at the moment produce the map that I want to produce in Azure Maps. So what are our options? There's quite a few extra things I might want to build. So that map where we've got the local authority boundaries and we've coloured each shape based on the amount of crime in there, that's called a choropleth map. And it's useful for statistical reporting. It's also useful if you've got custom sales territories, for example, and you want to be able to shape those by how many, how successful your sales team are. I might not want to use Azure Maps as my background maps. I might work for an organization that has its own map server and it has, all sorts of context already available in that organization. It might be an oil and gas company and they've got some specific offshore mapping with oil fields marked on them, for example. I might work for an energy company or a utility company, so I might want to be plotting my gas pipelines or my electricity lines or my water network on the map and be able to link that back to the report in my data and color that based on, I don't know, how leaky are my water pipes? How much sewage am I pumping out into the ocean? That kind of thing. I might want to cluster in a different way. Heat map and those circles are one thing, but there are much better ways of clustering spatial data. I might just want to put an icon or an image or a symbol on the map. I might work for a retailer and I want to know where my competition is. Maybe I'm Sainsbury's and I want to put all the Tesco and Aldi and what have you logos all around me so I can see where my competition is. And then overlay my customers underneath maybe. Or I might work for a company that has a fleet of delivery vehicles or aircraft or cars or ships. And I want to know where they are in the world and be able to track those in Power BI. And at the moment, I can't do any of that in Azure Maps. But fortunately, in Power BI, we're not limited to those core visuals. We have something, we have what was once called custom visuals. They're now just referred to as visuals that have been created using the SDK. I still call them custom visuals. And there's actually more than 20 of them in AppSource for creating maps in Power BI. And as I mentioned, I've created one of them, so full disclosure there. I actually worked with the guys at the beginning when they were building the Mapbox visual as well. And these two visuals are the most popular map visuals, custom visuals in Power BI. But my issue with the Mapbox visual is that the developers that built it have since left Mapbox. In fact, one of them is now the lead engineer for Google Maps. So I'm pretty sure he won't be working on it anymore. He's got his own maps to make. And as a result, well, bit of context, I think Mapbox were hoping to have the Mapbox visual built into Power BI Desktop in the same way as the Esri visual has been. But for whatever reason, they weren't successful in, I guess, convincing Microsoft to be able to do that. And as the developers have left, nobody is now supporting Mapbox, the Mapbox visual from Mapbox. it still exists in AppSource, but if you go to download it, you'll notice it's actually now being supported by a unrelated third-party European consultancy that's picked up the open source project and is trying to keep it alive. But there's two more issues with it. One, it's using a really old Mapbox API that Mapbox have moved on from. And also, it's using a really old Power BI Visuals API that at some point will stop being supported on the Microsoft side. So it's going to need a real big revamp at some point just to keep it alive. And then, of course, there's IconMap. Who knows Marco Russo? Do you know that name? Quite a lot of noise. So Marco Russo is the expert in DAX, one of the main languages in Power BI. In fact, he trains Microsoft on DAX. What you might not know is he also runs a custom visual company called OKViz. And he was on a webinar last week that I managed to watch most of. And he was talking about custom visuals in Power BI, in particular, the free ones, of which he has some himself. And he was saying that the thing with the really popular free custom visuals is at some point they become a victim of their own success. And unfortunately, this is kind of what's happened to IconMap. So I got the usage numbers from Microsoft last week, which apparently I'm not allowed to share, but let's just say it's pretty well used. And the problem with having a visual built by somebody in the community that is maybe as well used as some of the core visuals is Microsoft don't support it, right? The only person who's been supporting IconMap is me in my spare time in the evenings or getting up at 5 in the morning on top of a full-time job. And most days I get more than 10 emails a day of people asking for help. And it's not just like, why, how do I put a circle on the map? I get whole great big complex data models sent to me, which inevitably need completely redoing just to be able to get the data in the right shape to even think about putting on a map. It's never the map, it's always the data model, right? Always. So it's got to the point where I can't continue to support this in my own free time. So the answer has been, and hence the change of job, to do it full time. Stop doing the thing that I enjoy in the evenings and make it my job. So the result of which is I'm going to be releasing a new visual called IconMap Pro. It's a completely new visual. It's not IconMap with some new features in it. It's been rebuilt from the ground up. I'm still building it. It's not finished. I reckon I'm a week or maybe 2 off. But I thought I'd give you a little preview of what's coming in the next couple of weeks. It should be in AppSource hopefully by the end of May. So let's jump out of PowerPoint again and let's open up Power BI Desktop. Let's close that one down. And I've got another Power BI Desktop file. It's exactly the same data set, just so we comparing apples with apples. Does anybody else find this takes longer and longer to load every single month?
I don't think it'll go exponentially.
Yeah. Are we there? I think we're there. Right. So you can see I've got the new visual down here in the custom visuals area of Power BI. Let's drag it on and let's kind of build up the same kind of report that we were looking at before. What have we got? So I've got that long lat combined field. I've got longitude and latitude. Let's drag those in. And I've got crime count. And that should draw us some circles. And the interesting thing is, right, we've started over here and we've drawn to here and we've hit 30,000 rows and exactly the same thing as Azure Maps. We're missing 660 rows of data. But the nice thing is, we go to the formatting options and expand data layers. Should we have 90,000 rows? Click out. Oh, and there's the rest of our data. And we're not having to do any complicated workaround. We're just importing 90,000 rows of data into our visual. Now, 90,000 rows is just about okay, and we're only plotting circles. I've actually limited it at 120,000 rows. You start going beyond that, and there's compromises to be made, right, between performance versus showing all your data. And actually, the mechanism behind the visual, the Power BI mechanism to keep paging and loading 30,000 rows, isn't particularly efficient. So if you pull in loads of data, it does get slower. So don't expect it to perform as fast as 30,000 rows, but it's not bad. What else can we do? Sticking with this, well, obviously we've got heat maps. So if I take off circle size and then go back to the formatting options, oops, click on the map, data layers, circles off, heat map on. We have heat maps. That's fine. But as I mentioned, we don't always want to cluster. Oh, actually, let me just show you one other thing quickly before I show you something completely new. Put the circles back on a sec. So configuration in here. If I turn on clustering, in the same way as we did in the Azure Maps visual, there's a slight difference in the clustering. Instead of having lots of blue circles, we've got the ability to have them different colors, so that the one containing thousands or hundreds of items are different colors to the ones that have just got a few, or green where they've only got a handful of rows. So as I zoom in now, it's much easier to see which ones of those circles have got more in. And actually, as you hover over them, particularly at the zoomed out level, we get this little polygon, so you can show the extent of the points that are made up by that bigger circle. And again, of course, you can click on them to zoom in. And if you don't like the different colors, I know it's a bit novel, but we have formatting options to change it. So you can go in and customize it. You can even choose to turn that polygon off or make everything blue to match the Azure Maps style if you wanted to. Right, let's turn that off though. So I showed the heat map, but I also mentioned that you don't always want to use a heat map to do your aggregation. Uber have come up with this mechanism for splitting chunking up the whole of the globe into hexagons. And as you go into different levels of resolution, and you can set this dynamically with a through conditional formatting, so you can just have a slicer to change how detailed you want your hexagons to be, or you can do it with a measure based on whether you're drilling down or not. Let's just tweak the formatting slightly. Let's set it to be the same as we had for the heat map earlier. And you can see that without having to do any for coding, we're using Uber's hexagon grid, and this will work for anywhere in the country, and we'll get those maps showing where those clusters of crime have occurred. Running out of time, let's whiz through these quickly. The thing that I want to do at the end of the last bit was draw that map of the local authority areas and colour those. So let's do that, and then I'll show you some pre-built examples quickly before I run out of time. So let's go and take off our longitudes and latitudes because they're no longer relevant. And instead, we're going to base it on our local authority districts. So I'm going to drag the code on there. I'll drag the local authority onto, oops, scroll down a bit, this other field here. And then I need to tell the map visual, where do I get my local authorities from? Well, I haven't got time to do it all on the fly, but I've gone back to that Office for National Statistics site, to the GeoPortal bit, and just downloaded the shapefile that contains all of the local authority areas for the whole of England. So let's load that in. What am I doing? I'm turning on shapes from files, and I can either pull it from a URL, but in this case, I'm going to upload a file. Now, in an ideal world, we'd have that little button here to click, and it would give us a file pop-up. Unfortunately, Microsoft don't give custom visual developers the ability to have that button in the formatting options. So I've had to kind of work around it a little bit. This is my compromise option. Let me expand these out. So I've got a little toggle here. It says display file upload button. So if I click that, we get a button appear up there, and we just have to click that. It's not the end of the world. It's just not as nice as I would like. And here are my shape files. So this is as downloaded from Office for National Statistics. Interesting thing about this, it's actually in British National Grid coordinates. It's not in longitudes and latitudes, but the map visual will convert it into longitudes and latitudes for you. If you've ever used Shape Map, you'll know you have to simplify these polygons to make them small enough to be performant in Power BI. It does that for you as well. So you don't need to rely on third-party tools like QGIS or MapShaper to modify your polygons beforehand. It will do those as it loads them into the visual for you. So here we are. So we've got all of our local authority boundaries. The ones in blue are the ones that it's been able to link back to my local authority code field in my data. The ones in grey are the ones that were in the file, but it didn't find anything in the data for. So I can either format them just to keep them on there, or I've got a little switch here to remove them. So I end up with just the England ones that match the data. And to produce the choropleth map, it's just a simple case of applying the conditional formatting as a gradient based on that crime count field. And let's change the outline color to black as well, so it's a little bit clearer. And we can see that we've got now all our local authority areas colored. So the deeper the color, the more crime. And funnily enough, we have this little polygon here, the darkest color over Birmingham. I didn't frig the data. This is real data. It's just in 2023 in March. Yeah. But it'd be nice to be able to dig in and see which bits of Birmingham were responsible for that crime, right? So let's go down to the next level in the hierarchy. So if I pull on my lower super output area fields as well, and go back into the formatting options for the shapes, and I want not one level, but two levels in my hierarchy. So I get a second little button here to click now. So I can upload my file. This is actually a really big file, so it really does need some processing. You don't want to be loading in a 16 meg zip file to bulk up your Power BI report, so it is going to do a lot of simplifying behind the scenes. And it might take a moment to process. Could have done it. Let's drill down into Birmingham. And hopefully, if it's finished processing, we get that more detailed low super output area set of polygons. So I've been able to build the map that I want. Now, there's lots of other different types of map that we can build, and I'd love to build them all from scratch, but I think I'm probably over time already. How long have I got?
I think some questions.
Okay, give me 2 minutes then, and I'll stop. So I just want to quickly run through some other options. So things that we can draw, lines on the map, which can be straight, curved, or follow the curvature of the Earth, as they are in this case. So this example's got every single route that every airline in the world flies in. So that's lines. I showed shapes that I've loaded from a shapefile, but sometimes we need those shapes in our data, actually in our Power BI data set, because those boundaries, those low super output area and the local authority boundaries change over time. So you might want a different set of boundaries according to how you've filtered or sliced your data. Or you might have that data inside a Snowflake database. Snowflake has a geospatial data type, so does SQL Server, so does Postgres. You can just connect Power BI to those databases, drag your field into the map visual, and then it will display those shapes on the map. So these shapes haven't been uploaded from files. These have all come in from an underlying database. And this is the water infrastructure of a Canadian city. And of course, everything interacts. So if I want to have a look at all of the cast iron pipes that maybe are over 100 years old and conditionally formatted by age, then it's highlighting all of those pipes that might need some work or replacement. Last couple. This one's quite interesting because somebody last time I showed this last week actually asked for this example. The ability to show different types of item on the same map. So in this case, this is all of those lower super output areas, but the ability to pick how they're coloured. So we've got loads of different things on here. So if we colour them by income, so it's going to highlight the areas that have got the higher income. And then I can overlay things like, I don't know, where are all the dentists? And then the red circles will update, hopefully, and represent where all the dentists are. There we go. Quite a lot of dentists. And then last one, I promise. I haven't shown all of them, but I built this one this morning, again from scratch, but it's similar to the session I showed at SQL Bits. Talked about tracking assets. These are all of the planes right now that are over West London, and you'll notice that this map updates every 5 seconds. So we're drawing the lines and we've got the images drawn on the map rotated in the direction of travel. So if we sit here long enough, we should see all of those planes either landing at Gatwick, Heathrow or Stansted. So that's it. I'll wrap up there. As I say, it's coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. If you want to keep an eye on news, there will be a website for it, iconmappro.com, but otherwise best place to go at the moment is my company LinkedIn page, because I haven't got a website for the company yet. So all information will get posted on there in the next few weeks. Any questions?
All I've been asked is with the Azure map, by default, you're uploading it to a report server, not like the AIQ influencers. It won't actually load where the basic maps go out of the box, but you always load it. One of them to report server, or want to publish it to web, it'll be completely fine. But how does, can we keep the old maps, I'm saying, just because it doesn't have to authenticate against Azure and there's no bot?
Yeah, so yeah, Azure Maps doesn't support publish to web. As of last week, it does now support Power BI embedded, but it doesn't support report server.
A lot of companies, like 20,000, 30,000 employees, it makes sense to keep Power BI for I think it would.
Yeah, the visual, yeah, and I don't know what Microsoft's plans are, but at the moment, you're right. At some point, those reports will either stop working or they'll have to sort out the licensing situation for it, or you'll have to revert to a custom visual that does support report server.
Well, yeah.
Which, or you might use other technology. Yeah, I get that. I'm sure. I mean, they must be considering supporting report server. I just don't know at what point that will come. Yeah.
So, to ensure that the data you're reporting is well formatted, because the baseline I am importing. So when I import the data, after learning a few things, then the data itself is not well clean or formatted.
Are you talking about
When you import the
geospatial data or all data?
all data, like what should be the best practice? Show that it's
That's probably a topic for a whole session in its own right. I think from a point of view of spatial data, probably need some kind of validation as part of your ingestion pipeline. And I guess that probably relates to all data, right? You should probably have a process as you're preparing and ingesting your data that it's valid, whatever the data ingestion principles are. But you probably should be checking that the data is valid before it gets to the point of being brought into Power BI. Probably want to chat about after.
I did want a star schema, I guess, as a start
Oh,
point.
yeah.
So that goes without saying.
Yeah.
The data. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all about the data model, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Let's do one more question.
Right.
Okay, two more questions.
Well, yeah,
First one.
we've got pizza in the middle in the minute, haven't we? So we.
It's more of a personal question, but how did you get into building custom visuals? Like what?
Oh, right, yeah. So languages behind. So Power BI itself is interesting. Most of Power BI is built in a language called TypeScript, which sits on top of JavaScript. So it's like a typed version of JavaScript, and that applies to Power BI Desktop and the Power BI service. Other languages in Power BI are C++ for the analysis services bit that does all of the the engine, and then Power Query is written in C#. So anything visual, and including the UI itself, is effectively all JavaScript. And my background before I got into data was web development. So I kind of had HTML and JavaScript background. It was all horribly out of date, and to be frank, still is all horribly out of date. But it kind of let me bring those two worlds together and have the ability to build the web front end side of it, but understand how that needed to link into all of the Power BI data. But
One device.
Go on, thank you. So yeah, Ticantis is now your business.
yeah,
Congratulations, by the way.
thank you.
Congratulations. And Icon Map Pro is going to be one of your products.
It is, yeah. So the interesting thing about releasing a commercial visual is that to build a map visual, you've got to put a map behind it, right? And maps don't come free. Even on Icon Map, we use OpenStreetMap's servers, but they're only supposed to be, if you read the license conditions, they're only really supposed to be for light use cases. They're not for a great big company to build a solution used by all 60,000 of their employees on a daily basis. So one of the first things I've had to do is be able to decide whether I'm going to piggyback off a third-party provider like Azure Maps or Google Maps or Mapbox or one of the others, or build our own equivalent of those services to be able to provide background maps. So I decided to do all of those. So the new visual supports our own maps that are based on OpenStreetMap data, but on our own servers, or Google Maps, or Azure Maps, or Mapbox, or others, including Ordnance Survey, by the way. All public sector organisations in the UK get free use of Ordnance Survey, so that's quite a good one for UK companies to support. But the problem with having our own servers is they cost money. So need the visual to be a commercial visual in order to firstly pay for that, and also to be able to provide a proper support service so that isn't me at 10 o'clock at night if I get time. We want to be, it's been really frustrating not being able to support everybody that asks for help. And now hopefully with a team behind me, I will be able to. So yeah, that's the plan and the reason behind it.
Cool. All right, guys, let's leave it there. Let's grab some pizza there through the doors, and let's finish with a round of applause.